Story 1. BF never told me his business partner was his ex until I found the romantic photos, so I told him we could get back together if he would cut contact with her completely. I started dating my boyfriend Jeff 10 months ago. This relationship has been amazing so far, and I definitely see a future with him. There's just one problem. He has a weird relationship with his ex that's starting to make me really uncomfortable and suspicious. When we started dating, he often talked about his best friend, Jenna, who he also owns a business with. He made it pretty clear that she was an important person to him. I knew they had spent vacations together, and he mentioned hanging out with her parents a few times too. A few weeks after I met him, I creeped through all his pictures on Facebook because who doesn't do that with someone they just started dating? I saw a bunch of very couple-like pictures of him and Jenna. I also found her Instagram and looked through it. It's filled with pictures of Jeff. A bunch of them had the hashtags relationship goals and other similar things. So in this way, I figured out that they had dated. I kept waiting for him to tell me that himself, but he never did. About 2 months after we started dating, I straight up asked him if he had dated her, and he admitted it. He said that they had met in school, and had similar ideals and ambitions. They dated for 9 months, and broke up a year and a half ago. I asked him why they'd broken up, and he said their relationship was awful, and they worked much better as friends. They started their business after they broke up, and things have apparently been going well between them since then. I started to get kind of suspicious about her, though, when time passed, and I still hadn't met her. I met his friends and family pretty soon after we started dating, but I didn't meet Jenna. I went to numerous social events that I'd expect her to be at, but she was never there. There were a number of occasions when our paths almost crossed, and I really thought I was going to meet her, but I never did. For example, I went to their office a few times to meet Jeff after work, and Jenna was already gone. Or sometimes I'd come to meet him, and he'd come outside to meet me so I wouldn't have to go inside. Things started to get really weird about 3 months ago. Jeff and Jenna were having an open house night one evening. Jeff came over to my place after work, and we had a few hours to kill before it was time to go, so we went out for dinner and then walked to the office. I was kind of expecting that I'd come in and help them set up, but when we were a block away, he started asking me if I had lots of work to do and saying there was a really nice coffee shop nearby. He actually walked me to the coffee shop and sat me down, then left to go get ready with Jenna. He told me to come to the office in an hour and a half. About half an hour before I left for the office, I texted and said I hoped everything was going well and asked if there was anything I could do. He replied and said something had come up for Jenna, and she couldn't be there tonight. I was getting really suspicious at this point. I went to the office half an hour later, and sure enough Jenna wasn't there. People kept asking about her all night, and Jeff told them she had a family emergency. When we walked back to the car later that night, he told me what happened. While he and Jenna were getting ready, she had a panic attack and said she was scared to meet me. She said she wouldn't be able to handle it, and either had to leave or he had to tell me not to come. He told her to leave, so she did. Since then, a couple more weird things have happened, and I still haven't met Jenna. Once, when I was hanging out with Jeff, we went to the office so he could grab something. When we were almost there, he looked at his phone and said Jenna's still there. Let's just go for a walk. So we walked around the block for half an hour, and then came back when she was gone. After that happened, I told Jeff I felt really uncomfortable with the situation. I could respect that they were friends who had dated, but the way she was acting about me was very suspicious. He apologized and said he had actually been really mad at her, but wasn't sure what to do. He also told me a couple of other weird stories about things she'd done. He went to a party a few weeks ago, I didn't go, and his phone had died that night. When he got home and charged his phone, it was full of texts from Jenna saying she was outside in her car and asking if I was there or not. She actually never even ended up going to the party simply because she didn't know if I was there or not. Now here's the kicker. Jeff and Jenna are currently on a 2-week-long camping trip. They've been planning this trip since before I met him, but considering the way she's behaved, I feel very uncomfortable about him being on this trip. I just looked at her Instagram, and she's posted 5 new pictures of him. As awesome as Jeff is, I'm really fed up with this, and I'm seriously considering breaking things off when he gets back. I'm being unreasonable. Comments where OP has replied, Glitterland, you're not being unreasonable at all, and I can understand why you feel so upset about the whole situation. If I were you, I'd be asking Jeff a few questions. Does he know the root issue of why she doesn't want to meet you? Is she like this with anyone else? Explain to him that the situation is upsetting you, and that you aren't comfortable with him going on a 2-week vacation with her. She is, after all, his ex-girlfriend, and the whole thing strikes me as a little strange. Maybe you could talk about meeting Jenna with Jeff present in a quieter, mutual place like a cafe or a restaurant. If Jeff was my boyfriend, I'd be looking for answers. Best of luck to you, and please post an update. Oop. It's kind of reassuring to hear that other people don't think I'm being unreasonable. I have actually asked him if he knows why she's being like this, and he says he's asked her the same thing and hasn't gotten a clear answer. He said he's asked her if she still has feelings for him, and she said no. They're actually already on their trip, so there's not much I can do about it at this point. I think I'll try probing him a bit more when he gets back and see if he might know a bit more than he's telling me about her behavior. Tower, oh, you're not only not being unreasonable, but you have put up with way more than most other people would have. I would have known out of there when I found her Instagram and realized he didn't tell you that he had dated her, not to mention all the crazy, over-the-top nonsense she's pulled since, and he is going on a 2-week-long trip with this girl. Oh, God, so much nope. Oop, well, I'm glad that at least I'm not the only one who thinks it's weird. I kind of feel like I probably would have called it off already if he wasn't so great in other ways. This is seriously the best relationship I've ever had, but the whole Jenna situation is really over the top. Why wasn't OOP on the camping trip, or why wasn't it cancelled? I have to work, and I was never invited. As far as why it wasn't cancelled, good question. Update. I wrote my previous post over a year ago, and a lot has happened since then. I wanted to give everyone an update since the advice on this sub was really helpful at the time. For a few months after I wrote my OP, nothing much happened. Jeff and I continued dating, and he continued being friends as cell partners with Jenna. I never met her, but everything else in our relationship seemed to be going so well that I decided I'd try to deal with it. Things got really hard, however, when I had to take a work contract 12 hours away from home for 3 months. I hardly saw Jeff the whole time, and I looked at Jenna's Instagram almost every day to see if she'd posted more photos of them together. More often than not, she had. Since I wasn't physically present, I felt like Jenna was his real girlfriend. I felt completely worthless and constantly stressed out knowing my boyfriend was spending all his time with another woman who I already had suspicions about while I was away for work. I decided to break up with Jeff. I broke up with him as soon as I came back, and I made it very clear that his relationship with Jenna was intolerable for me. I told him he was going to have a hard time dating anyone who wasn't her as long as she was still in his life. He kept saying he didn't understand why it was such a problem. He told me he couldn't control her behavior, but he promised me he hadn't cheated on me. I explained to him that by allowing their friendship to continue, he was condoning her behavior. I told him I didn't really even care if he physically cheated or not since he'd already shown disrespect for me and our relationship. I didn't speak to him for a few months, and I went on with my life. I took another contract out of town, and even considered moving permanently to another city. One night though, Jeff called me and apologized. He said he had been thinking about our relationship a lot and realized he had been in the wrong. He said his relationship with Jenna was beginning to feel toxic to him, and he made arrangements to dissolve their business partnership. After that, I decided to meet up with him, not necessarily to give him another chance, but to discuss the situation further. When we met up, he promised to stop talking to Jenna and unfollowed her on all social media. As of now, he has not spoken to her in 6 months, and we've gotten back together. We actually ran into her at a concert a few weeks ago, and they didn't even say hi to each other. I feel much more respected and confident in my relationship now. Next story. Ex dumped me because I couldn't give her a luxury lifestyle, then married a rich guy who turned out to be abusive. She started calling me daily for help. My friends think I'm an a-hole for blocking my ex who is married because she keeps calling and messaging me. I wanted to ask if what I'm doing is right, or if I should keep in touch with her. I dated Lisa for 4 years, and we broke up 2 years ago. Lisa told me she didn't see a future with me and wanted to call things off. There were many reasons, and I knew it was coming. Lisa came from a wealthy family and I met in college. Our relationship was great during the college years. However, after we graduated and got jobs, it became clear to her that I would never be able to provide the lifestyle she was used to. She hated the small apartment we rented because I wanted to pay off my student loan quickly, and she resented that I couldn't afford to take her on nice vacations. It sucked, but I couldn't blame her. I loved Lisa deeply, but I also knew she deserved the life she wanted. After we broke up, we still had lingering feelings and stayed friends for a few months. We had mutual friends and would meet regularly. I never hated Lisa. In fact, I cherished the memories of the 4 years we were together. But I was also acutely aware that we came from different worlds, and that she shouldn't have to settle because of me. Still, it was hard to let go completely, and sometimes I wondered if I'd ever truly get over her. We drifted apart after Lisa started dating a family friend. I met him a few times at parties. He knew Lisa and I had dated, and though he was polite, I started avoiding her and focused on work. Eventually, I moved to another city and lost touch with Lisa. I heard from mutual friends that she got married 6 months ago. I wasn't invited to the wedding, but I was happy for her. I also dated someone briefly last year, but right now my career is my main focus. That's what I need to believe. 3 weeks ago, out of the blue, I got a call from an unknown number. It was Lisa. She started with small talk, and we caught up on each other's lives. She told me about the new house she and her husband had just bought and how busy she'd been. I told her about my work and my new life. It was nice, like catching up with an old friend. She gave me her new number, and the call lasted about 20 minutes. Although I found it odd, I figured she might have thought about me and decided to reach out. The next day, she messaged me and sent a few photos of her new house. I complimented her on them. 2 days later, she called me again, saying she was driving and thought about chatting. We talked about my new city, my new friends, and even gossiped about our old mutual friends. Then, she started sending me photos from a recent party where they all met up. Over the next 2 weeks, Lisa began calling me almost every day. I ignored most of her calls, but she always said she had free time and wanted to talk. She started sending me TikTok memes and messages, initiating conversations all the time. At first, I brushed it off, thinking she was just being friendly, but it felt wrong. Lisa is married, and I shouldn't be talking to her so frequently. The more she reached out, the more unsettled I became. Was she unhappy in her marriage? Was she just lonely? Or was I reading too much into it? Last Friday, I finally messaged her, saying that it felt inappropriate for us to talk so often, given that she's married now. She replied almost immediately, saying there's nothing wrong with us being good friends like before. I didn't want to continue, so I told her we needed to stop talking for a while because I needed to focus on work. After that, I blocked her number. She called our mutual friend Jess, crying about how I was rude and blocked her. Jess told our other friends, and some of them called me, saying I was being unreasonable to treat Lisa that way and cut her off. I don't understand how no one sees that it's wrong for Lisa to call her ex when she's happily married after more than a year of no contact. It doesn't make sense, but maybe I'm the one who's missing something. Am I being unreasonable with Lisa, or was it right for me to block her for both our sakes? And if I'm right, why do I still feel so conflicted? Update: October 10th, 2024. I had posted a month and a half ago regarding going no contact with my ex-girlfriend, Lisa, after she tried to rekindle our friendship. Lisa married her husband, Jason, 6 months ago, and I wanted to respect their marriage and blocked her after I felt we were crossing a line. My friend was very critical of me because I was ignoring her, and most of you agreed that I did the right thing. Things have been really crazy since then, and many of you asked for an update. I wanted to respect Lisa's privacy, but as things settle down, I am again not sure if I'm doing the right thing and need advice on my situation. Sorry for the long post, but too many things have happened, and I wanted to get this off my chest. After I blocked Lisa, she called my friend, Jess, and wanted to talk to me one last time. I initially declined but finally caved in and told her that it would be the last time we would talk. Lisa called me on Saturday morning and told me that she wanted to talk to me because she needed help and does not know if she can trust anyone. She sounded awful, and I had to calm her down before she told me what was going on. Lisa told me that after we broke up, she met her husband, Jason, within a few months. Jason asked her out for a date in front of her mom, and her mom insisted that she at least give Jason a chance. Jason was a charmer, and they quickly became official. Jason was everything I was not. He came from a wealthy family, had everything figured out. He took her on all the vacations I could never afford, and Lisa loved this life where she did not have to worry about things like loans. Money. When she was with me, they had a grand wedding, but Lisa told me that things quickly started going south. One night, she was hanging out with Jason's friends, and one of his college friends started flirting with her and touched her inappropriately. Lisa was shocked and told Jason immediately. Jason was drunk and told Lisa to lighten up and enjoy the party and did not confront the friend. As months went by, Lisa found proof that Jason and his friends were doing drugs, and that Jason had slept with most of his friends' wives. It was a common thing in their friend group. She suspects it happened during the time they were dating, and also a few times after they were married. She confronted Jason, but he just got mad at her and told her that she was being too uptight. Things got messy, and Lisa told me that there were some instances of physical abuse, though she did not go into too many details. Lisa wanted to leave Jason and told her mom about it. However, her mom told her that it was too early in their marriage and instead, Lisa should work harder to make Jason happy so that he does not need to look at other women. Lisa never told any of our mutual friends about this because they all loved Jason, mostly because he paid for all the parties, restaurants, etc. And Lisa just felt very lonely and helpless. That is when she got a burner phone and started messaging me on it. She apologized to me for getting me involved in her mess, but asked me if I could buy her a ticket to my city so that she could get far away from Jason and everyone and figure out what to do next. She could not buy the tickets because Jason had access to all her cards and accounts, and she could not trust any of her friends back home because Jason might know about it. I was really angry with the whole situation and agreed to help her. I got the tickets immediately and did not email her any details. I only told her the confirmation numbers. When she packed and reached the airport, she flew to my city and is staying in my guest room. As expected, hell broke loose as soon as she called her parents to tell them that she had left Jason and was with me. She told them and our friends why she did what she did. However, everyone just thought that we had an affair and she left Jason for me. Jason was really angry and demanded her to come home. Either they were done. His parents called her to plead with her to come back and talk about things calmly. Her dad refused to talk to her, while her mom flew to my city, and we all met, and she told her what happened. Her mom was more worried about their reputation than about what Lisa went through in the last few months. It was just sickening. Lisa is looking for lawyers to file for a divorce and has refused to talk to Jason since she came here. Jason has not made an attempt to visit her and initially sent her a lot of threatening messages. I feel he was advised not to send any more incriminating messages to her, and the messages from him suddenly stopped. Now there is radio silence. Lisa has been living with me for the last month. She has offered to pay me rent, but I have told her to just save up for any legal fees, as it seems her parents might cut her off. Many of our mutual friends still refuse to believe what Jason did, and some feel we are having an affair. Many of them have completely stopped talking to Lisa and me and even removed us from their socials. Lisa looks like an empty shell of herself. She was the most kind, fun person when we were together. Even though she keeps a brave face, she just bursts into tears randomly. I feel she has still not told me the whole story on what Jason did to her, but I'm just going to be a good friend and give her the space she needs. I honestly am not sure how to feel. Everything happened so suddenly. I never had a time to react and think if what I am doing is right. I don't know how I got into a situation where my married ex is now living with me. I cannot kick her out, and I want to be there to support her in such a horrible time. However, a part of me also does not know if what I am doing is right, as she is still a married woman, and I do not want to be labeled as a homewrecker or a cheater. Any advice would be appreciated. Edit. Just wanted to add some context since many of you are asking about it in the comments. Lisa left her main phone home when she left since her husband can track her phone. He was already paranoid that Lisa would leave him and was tracking all accounts and Lisa's whereabouts. She did not want to let anyone know she was at my place. However, I insisted that she at least call and tell her parents that she was safe, else they would have thought she disappeared and might have gone to the cops to file a missing person report. Jess did not help her because Lisa did not tell Jess or any of our friends about the abuse. All Lisa told me was that she did not trust any of our friends right now. I am still not sure why. What happened there? However, most of our friends have sided with Jason, and he is spreading a false narrative that Lisa married him for money and waited for 6 months exactly so that she's eligible for significant alimony based on their prenuptial agreement. Everyone suspects that Lisa and I planned this whole charade for Jason's money. Lisa left and came to me because she wanted to put as much physical distance between Jason and her before she told him that she was leaving him. And of course, Lisa and I are not getting back together. I understand the vulnerable position she is in, and I just want to make sure she is safe. Finally, what are my future plans? I am taking one day at a time. I luckily have a very well-paying job now and do not have to worry about financially supporting her for a short time. However, I do understand Lisa cannot live with me forever, and we need to figure out something as soon as things settle down. Comments where OP has replied. Commenter 1. Wow, what a wild ride. Although it seems like you made the right decision in blocking her. At first, I'm happy you were able to intervene and support her during her difficult time. It's terrible when people put their reputation before the welfare of others. I'm sending Lisa my best wishes and hoping that everything turns out well for her in the end. Op, it is just crazy to see Lisa go through so much in the last few months and no one is standing in her corner. I also hope she finds strength too. Commenter 3. Okay, she should not be living with you. You are not her savior. Maybe what she's telling you is true, and maybe it's exaggerated to gain your sympathy. She needs to end her marital relationship and deal with her baggage from that before jumping back in with you. All of the reasons she threw you over for her husband still exist. She is still married, period. She can go live with her parents. If he has money and she doesn't, it could be a long, messy divorce. Step back and let her deal with her crap. Story 2. Selfish sister stole our late mom's jewelry, sold it for $10,000, then gave it to our 80-year-old grandma as a birthday gift while I've been supporting her for years. When I was just 11 years old, I lost my parents in a hiking accident. My parents were both avid hikers, passionate about the outdoors, and they frequently went on hiking and camping trips. These adventures were a regular part of their lives, something they loved and looked forward to. Whenever they planned one of these trips, my younger sister, Karen, and I would be dropped off at our grandmother's house. She would take care of us while our parents took some time off. It had become almost a routine. We'd spend the weekend with Grandma, waiting for our parents who would return with stories of their latest adventure. But one day, something went terribly wrong. It was a rainy morning, the kind of day that would usually make hiking more challenging. The details were too much for me to fully grasp at the time, but what I learned was that my parents had an accident while hiking. They slipped and fell. Luckily, someone spotted them and immediately called 911 for help. I still vividly remember the moment when my grandmother received the call. Her face drained of color, and she collapsed to the ground in shock. I didn't know what was happening at first. All I could see was the overwhelming grief in her eyes. She quickly gathered herself, and with a sense of urgency and dread, she rushed Karen and me to the hospital. Throughout the ride, my grandmother kept silently weeping while holding on to me and Karen. When we arrived at the hospital, The news was devastating. My parents had been declared dead on arrival. I was too young to fully understand the permanence of death, but old enough to feel the crushing weight of the loss. Karen, who was younger than me, couldn't even comprehend what had happened. She kept asking where Mom and Dad were and why everyone was crying. It broke my heart to hear her questions, knowing that the answers would shatter her world as they had mine. Losing our parents at such a young age was an unbearable tragedy. It felt like the ground had been ripped out from under us. Out of nowhere, the funeral was a blur of grief, with relatives gathering to help us say goodbye to our Mom and Dad. But as the initial shock wore off, a harsh reality began to set in. None of our relatives were willing to take us in. They all had their own lives, their own kids, their own challenges, and though they were there to support us in those immediate days, none of them could see themselves raising two young children. In the midst of all this, it was my grandmother who stepped up. She was the only one who didn't hesitate, the only one who, despite her own grief and the challenges ahead, agreed to take on the responsibility of raising both me and Karen. She didn't give up on us and agreed to fill the role of both mother and father, nurturing us, guiding us, and holding us together. Over the years, financially, things were tight. Our parents hadn't left much behind. They didn't have a lot of savings. Whatever little they had managed to save was carefully set aside for our future, particularly for Karen's and my college funds. My mother had also left behind some jewelry originally belonging to my grandmother, which was meant to be passed down to Karen and me when we got married. My grandmother kept the jewelry secure for us in a safe. Meanwhile, my grandmother, who was still working as a librarian at the local library, did what she could to make ends meet. Her job didn't pay much, but she was incredibly resourceful. Thankfully, she had inherited some money over the years after my grandfather and other members of her family had passed away, and that helped to cover the basics, but it wasn't enough. Sometimes, when things were particularly tough, she'd reach out to my mother's older brother, our uncle. He would send over whatever money he could spare to help pay for our groceries or other necessities. It was never a lot, but every little bit helped. Even with this assistance, life was far from easy. We were just scraping by, living day to day, stretching every dollar as far as it would go. Through all of this, I never felt the need to complain. I understood, even at a young age, just how much my grandmother was sacrificing to take care of us. She was doing everything in her power to ensure that we were fed, clothed, and had a semblance of normalcy in our lives despite the immense loss we had all suffered. Her strength and resilience were something I admired deeply. She was holding our broken world together with sheer willpower, and I knew it wasn't easy for her. Karen, on the other hand, struggled much more to adapt. She was younger, and had a harder time understanding the gravity of our situation. Even when we explained to her that our parents were gone, she would refuse to accept the truth. She often acted out, yelling and screaming whenever things didn't go her way. It was clearly her way of coping with the loss and the drastic changes in our lives, but it was also incredibly challenging for all of us. She didn't see the strength it took for her grandmother to get up every day and face the world to provide for us with so little. Karen's complaints and frustrations got tougher and tougher as she became a teenager. She began to develop this crazy idea in her head that our parents had actually left behind a significant sum of money when they passed away, and that our grandmother was somehow hiding it from us. It was a belief that seemed to fester in her mind, fueled by the anger and grief she had never fully processed. Karen became convinced that the reason we were living so frugally wasn't because we were scraping by, but because our grandmother was deliberately withholding the money to spend on herself. She first told me about this, and I immediately shut it down. Unlike her, I actually remembered all the sacrifices my grandmother had to make over the years. I also pointed out to her that if this was the case, then our uncle and other relatives would have surely pointed it out, since they would not let our parents' money get taken from us. However, Karen refused to let this idea go. She began to watch our grandmother's every move with suspicion, interpreting every small expenditure as proof of her belief. If our grandmother bought a new dress or spent money on something for herself, Karen would see it as evidence that she was hiding our money from us. I would often tell her how obsessive and crazy she had become, and would encourage her to seek counseling at school. One day, things came to a head. Karen, who had been harboring these thoughts for a long time, finally confronted our grandmother. Her voice was full of anger and accusation as she demanded to know why our grandmother was keeping the supposed fortune from us. She accused her of being selfish, of taking money that should have been used to make our lives better. She called her a thief and argued about how our parents would have been disappointed with Grandma. As you can guess, our grandmother was taken aback by the confrontation. She didn't even know that Karen believed in something so ridiculous. I could see the hurt in her eyes as Karen hurled these accusations at her. She had always been so patient with us, understanding that Karen's anger often came from a place of pain. But this was something different. This was an accusation that struck at the very core of everything she had done for us. Trying to keep things calm, our grandmother tried to explain the truth to Karen. She told her that there was no hidden fortune, that our parents had left behind very little money, and that every penny they did leave was carefully saved for our future, particularly for our college funds. She explained that the life we were living, as modest as it was the best she could provide given the circumstances. She reminded Karen that she had been working tirelessly to make sure we had what we needed, often putting her own needs aside. But Karen wasn't ready to listen. She was too caught up in her own anger and the false belief she had convinced herself was true. She couldn't see the sacrifice, the love, and the care that our grandmother had given us all these years. All she saw was what she believed to be a betrayal, and she couldn't let go of that. Watching this unfold was incredibly difficult for me. I understood Karen's pain, but I also saw the truth of our situation. Our grandmother had done nothing but give her all for us, and to see her questioned in this way was heartbreaking. In the end, I grew frustrated with Karen, and couldn't hold back any longer. I snapped, my voice trembling with anger and hurt as I confronted Karen. I yelled at her, telling her that she was making our grandmother miserable over something she didn't even have proof of. I tried to make her see reason, to understand that our grandmother had done nothing but care for us all these years, and that her baseless accusations were tearing our family apart. In my anger, I went further than I intended. I told Karen that if she couldn't stop this behavior, if she continued to lash out and make our grandmother's life difficult, then maybe she should leave. I suggested that if she was so convinced that our grandmother was hiding something from her, perhaps she should go live somewhere else and find out how difficult life can be. To my surprise, our grandmother, who had always been patient and gentle with Karen, agreed with me. She calmly told Karen that if she was so unhappy living with us, she would be willing to speak to our uncle about making other arrangements, since she only wanted the best for us. She wasn't angry, but there was a firmness in her voice that I hadn't heard before. It was clear that she was deeply hurt by Karen's accusations, but also that she was at the end of her rope. Karen's reaction was immediate and intense. She didn't take our grandmother's offer as a sign of concern or love, but as further proof that we were trying to get rid of her. Now that, in her mind, the truth had been revealed, she accused us of conspiring against her. It was at this point that both my grandmother and I started to realize that this was more than just teenage rebellion or grief. Karen's behavior had become increasingly erratic and paranoid, and it was clear that she needed more help than just counseling. What had started as frustration and anger had turned into something much more concerning. Her accusations, her belief in this non-existent conspiracy, and her refusal to accept any reassurance or comfort were signs that something was seriously wrong. It was frightening to realize that Karen might be struggling with a deeper mental health issue, something that required professional intervention. The idea that my sister, who had already been through so much, might be suffering in ways we couldn't fully understand was terrifying. Our grandmother reached out to my uncle, and both of them began looking into psychiatrists and more intensive treatment options for Karen. It wasn't long before they found a psychiatrist who took the time to understand Karen's behavior and the underlying issues driving it. After several evaluations, my sister was diagnosed with borderline personality disorder and depression. The diagnosis was a shock for us, as we had no idea that Karen was going through so much. The psychiatrist prescribed a range of medications aimed at stabilizing her mood swings and helping her manage her depression. He also spent time educating us, especially our grandmother, on how to deal with Karen's mood swings, how to communicate with her, and how to support her without exacerbating her condition. It was a lot to take in, but our grandmother, with her usual determination and love, embraced it all. She never wavered in her commitment to Karen, even after everything that had happened. Despite the diagnosis, Karen never once apologized for the hurtful accusations she had made towards Grandma. My grandmother, ever patient and forgiving, never held this against Karen. She forgave her completely and focused on providing the care and support Karen needed without expecting anything in return. As the years went by, I wish I could say that Karen worked hard to improve and that she took steps to manage her condition and build a life for herself. But the reality was more complicated, as she often resorted to harmful coping mechanisms. One of the most concerning behaviors was her tendency to steal, which seemed to be a way for her to cope with her mental illness, or perhaps an attempt to gain some control in her life. It wasn't uncommon for Grandma to notice small amounts of money disappearing. If she had a few dollars lying around, it would mysteriously vanish within hours. Karen would snoop around the house, always on the lookout for cash or valuables that she could take. This wasn't just a one-time issue. It was an ongoing problem that Grandma and I had to deal with regularly. The money Karen stole was often used for outings with her friends, partying, and other non-essential expenditures. It was disheartening to see her squander what she took on temporary pleasures, especially knowing how much effort Grandma put into managing her limited resources. It felt like a betrayal every time Karen stole money from her. However, despite the clear patterns of theft, Grandma's approach remained one of tolerance and patience. She continued to support Karen emotionally and financially, hoping that with time, Karen's behavior would change, or that she might find a way to manage her condition better. After high school, Karen decided that she was done with education. She didn't go to college, nor did she seem interested in pursuing higher education. Instead, with the money that our parents had left us. She took her share to move into a place of her own and started working at a local bakery, a job that required little of her in terms of qualifications but gave her a simple, steady routine. My grandmother never pressured Karen to do anything more. She understood that Karen was dealing with her own struggles. Hence, she let her do whatever she wanted. She never demanded that Karen follow a particular path or achieve specific goals. Instead, she focused on ensuring that Karen felt loved and supported, no matter what choices she made. Meanwhile, I went on to pursue a degree and eventually became a data analyst. Currently, I live on my own, and every month I send money to both my grandmother and Karen. For my grandmother, it's something I do willingly and with a sense of gratitude. She has given so much of herself over the years, sacrificing her own comfort to make sure Karen and I were taken care of. Hence, helping her out financially is the least I can do, and it's something I'm glad to do for her. But when it comes to Karen, it's a different story. Since the bakery doesn't pay her enough, and she has used up all of her share of our parents' savings, each month she comes to me with a new request. She will demand money for essential things like an air fryer, a hair color appointment, or a new gym membership. It's frustrating because I also help out with her rent, and then she keeps using me to fund her lifestyle rather than trying to stand on her own 2 feet. The truth is I could choose to cut Karen off financially. I could tell her that she needs to start managing on her own, to live within her means, and to stop relying on me to fund her wants. But I hesitate because I know what would happen if I did. If I stopped sending Karen money, she would turn to our grandmother, and that's something I can't bear to let happen. Our grandmother has already done more than enough for us. She raised us when no one else would, and she continued to support Karen through everything, even when it was clear that Karen wasn't putting in the effort to improve her situation. The last thing I want is for her to have to shoulder the burden of Karen's financial demands at this stage in her life. She deserves peace and stability, not more stress and worry about how to cover Karen's expenses. So, I've continued to send money to Karen begrudgingly each month. Even though it frustrates me, I do it because I feel like I don't have another option. The resentment I feel for my sister has built up over time, as my sister has a never-ending list of demands. It feels like she doesn't even try to be self-sufficient, and that she's taking advantage of the situation, because she knows I'll eventually give in as I feel pity for her mental health struggles. Just a week ago, Karen called me repeatedly while I was at the office. She was at the grocery store, frantic and demanding that I send her money because her card had been declined. I was in the middle of work, and the last thing I needed was this kind of distraction. My first instinct was to hang up on her. I've been dealing with her constant requests for money for so long now that it's become exhausting. But before I could do that, she played her usual card. She threatened to call our grandmother if I didn't help her out. That threat hit me hard as it always does. My sister knew exactly how to manipulate the situation, using our grandmother's vulnerability as leverage to get what she wanted from me. I transferred the money and asked her to not contact me again for money at least for a couple of days. Karen simply scoffed at me and disconnected the call rudely. This week marked a special occasion, our grandmother's 80th birthday. Some of her relatives had organized a small birthday party for close family members and friends. I was really looking forward to it, not just because it was a milestone birthday, but because it had been so long since I had seen my grandmother in person. We kept in touch regularly over the phone, but nothing compares to being there in person, especially for such an important day. When I arrived at the venue, I noticed Karen was already there, talking with some of our cousins. She barely acknowledged my presence, offering just a cursory glance before turning back to her conversation. It stung, but I decided to let it go for the sake of the day. My priority was to celebrate with our grandmother anyway, so I ignored her and went straight to give my grandmother a big hug. Seeing her smile and feeling her embrace after so long made everything else fade into the background. As the party went on, we sang happy birthday and gathered around to help her cut the cake. The room was filled with laughter and the warmth of family, all there to celebrate the incredible woman who had been such a pillar of strength for so many of us. When it was time for her to open presents, I watched as her face lit up with each thoughtful gift. It was heartwarming to see how much love and effort everyone had put into making her day special. When it came time for my gift, I was excited to tell her what I had planned. I had bought her a massage chair, a gift that I knew would make a real difference in her daily life. I'd noticed over the years how much her body ached, the toll that age and years of hard work had taken on her. A massage chair seemed like the perfect way to offer her some comfort and relief. I explained that it would be delivered and set up at her house in a few days. She was pleasantly surprised and genuinely touched, thanking me with a smile that showed how much it meant to her. After I shared my gift with Grandma and saw how happy it made her, Karen suddenly stood up and said it was her turn to give her a present. She started talking about how much Grandma had sacrificed for her over the years, how she could never fully repay her, but that she wanted to start with something meaningful. There was a dramatic pause before she pulled out an envelope and handed it to Grandma. When Grandma opened the envelope and revealed the $10,000 gift, The room fell silent for a moment before erupting into gasps of surprise and admiration. Everyone seemed stunned by Karen's gesture, and soon enough, the compliments started pouring in. People were calling Karen a sweetheart, praising her for her generosity and thoughtfulness. But as I stood there, I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Just a week ago, Karen had been calling me from the grocery store, demanding money because her card had been declined. I had sent her money to cover her groceries, and now she was standing here presenting a $10,000 gift to Grandma. The math didn't add up. How could she have saved up that kind of money when she'd been struggling to pay for her own basic needs every month? Knowing my sister, this wasn't an act of selflessness. Karen had always been focused on money. She was the one who constantly accused Grandma of hiding some non-existent inheritance, and she was always asking me for more. The idea that she would suddenly give away such a large sum of money out of the goodness of her heart didn't sit right with me. The whole situation felt off, like there was something fishy going on beneath the surface. There had to be more to the story. I decided not to say anything at that moment. It wasn't the time or place to call out Karen in front of everyone, especially not during Grandma's birthday celebration. Later, I returned to Grandma's place to stay with her for the next couple of days. I couldn't shake the unsettling feeling from Karen's unexpected gift. I decided to ask Grandma if she had any idea where Karen might have gotten the $10,000. Grandma, as perceptive as ever, shared my skepticism. She knew Karen's financial situation well enough to understand that it was highly unlikely Karen had managed to save up such a substantial amount. Grandma suggested, perhaps somewhat hopeful, that Karen might have been saving the money I had been sending her each month. But Karen wasn't known for saving money, so this was highly unlikely. I spent the rest of the evening trying to piece things together, but nothing seemed to make sense. I couldn't figure out how Karen had come into such a large sum of money. Karen did have a history of questionable behavior. She had been involved in petty theft as a teenager. It wasn't beyond the realm of possibility that she might have resorted to something shady to get this money. The idea that she could have stolen something or been involved in illicit activities crossed my mind. The next day, I decided to broach the topic with Grandma. I asked her if she had noticed anything missing from the house, anything that might suggest Karen had taken something. Grandma laughed it off, saying that there was nothing in the house worth stealing. Then, I suggested to Grandma that we could check if any of her jewelry was missing. She paused and took a serious look at the situation. She agreed that it wouldn't hurt to check, and let me help her open the safe where she kept her valuables. As she rummaged through the contents, her face grew more concerned until she finally confirmed that some of the jewelry, specifically pieces that had belonged to my mother, were indeed gone. I asked her to double-check just in case, but Grandma was certain about it since she kept track of everything she had stored inside her safe. She was adamant that they were missing. I asked her if Karen could have taken them, as she came to visit her frequently, and Grandma agreed that it was a possibility. Grandma asked if I could confront Karen about it since she was the only one who could have gotten access to the safe and the jewelry. Feeling a mix of anger and urgency, I called Karen. I confronted her directly about the missing jewelry, and she initially tried to deflect and downplay the situation. She seemed almost nonchalant, as if it were no big deal. But as I pressed her and threatened to file a case on the missing jewelry, her attitude shifted, and she admitted that she had indeed taken the jewelry. She explained that since she had been visiting Grandma regularly, she had learned the safe's password and used it to take the items. I was furious and yelled at her. She argued that the jewelry had been rotting in the safe and that by selling it, she had put it to good use. She went on to admit that she had used the proceeds to fund her own needs and wants. The $10,000 she had given Grandma was part of that money, while the rest was spent on herself. The sheer audacity of her actions left me stunned. When I demanded that she return the money since the jewelry belonged to both me and her, Karen refused. She defended her actions by accusing me of being selfish, claiming that I was trying to be greedy when I already had so much for myself. I reminded her that I had been sending her money every month, even though she was an adult, when she had no qualms about betraying me. Karen argued that I didn't understand the situation and insisted that she needed the money more than I did. Since then, I've been considering contacting the police about the matter. Update 1. Thank you, everyone, for confirming what I already knew I should be doing in this situation. Just to clarify, my grandmother is also upset with Karen and has tried to contact her, but my sister is avoiding her calls since she already knows what she is going to say to her. It seems that Karen only gave money to Grandma, possibly out of guilt, hoping that by giving $10,000 to Grandma, she could somehow absolve herself of the wrongdoing. Update 2. Today I went to my sister's house with the police. Her reaction when she opened the door was priceless. She looked absolutely terrified. I demanded she return my jewelry or give me my share of the money, threatening to have her arrested for theft if she didn't comply. Although she tried to negotiate, the presence of the police seemed to rattle her. She agreed to give me some of the money she had left from selling the jewelry and promised to pay the rest within a few days. I made it clear that if she didn't follow through, I would return to the police and have her arrested next time. I've also decided to send out an email to everyone warning them about Karen's behavior. I know she is likely to try and make me look like the villain while asking for their support. Grandma has already been telling people that the money she received for her birthday came from Karen stealing my mother's jewelry without consulting me or offering me my share. Suffice it to say, Karen won't have anyone left to turn to. I can't believe that after everything I did for her, she chose to betray me this way. Update 3. Hello everyone. I finally received my full share of the money from the jewelry Karen sold after involving the police and informing the rest of the family about her actions. She had no way out. Karen did contact me, furious and accusing me of forcing her to pay up. I reminded her that I had just as much right to the jewelry as she did. She begged me to let it go, but I stood firm. She was clearly trying to manipulate the situation and deflect responsibility yet again, but I didn't care any longer. In the end, she paid what she owed. It's incredibly sad that the entire situation has escalated to the point where Karen is now completely cut off from both me and Grandma. After such a breach of trust, Karen is no longer welcome at my grandma's place, as she is scared that she might continue stealing from her. I listened to some of your suggestions and plan on changing all her locks and installing cameras just for her own safety. Hopefully, in time, Karen will reflect on her actions and understand the impact her decision had on us. For now, I'm going to focus on healing and moving forward, both for myself and Grandma. Story 3. Stepson spread rumors about my daughter at tennis school until she quit, so I cut off his college fund unless he apologized. He dropped out. Now my wife wants to leave with him. Hey everyone, I need some advice about my family situation because it's honestly a mess right now. My daughter and stepson hate each other's guts, and it's gotten so bad that my wife and I are constantly stuck in the middle of their fights. We're arguing way more than we used to, and our marriage is really suffering because of all this drama. I just don't know what to do anymore, so here's the deal. I'm 49 and married to my second wife, Kira, who's 46. We've been married for 4 years. She's got a 20-year-old son named Jill from her first marriage, and I have a 15-year-old daughter, Ellie, from mine. Ellie's mom died in a car accident when she was just 7 years old. That was really rough on both of us, but especially on Ellie since she was so young. I had to step up and be both mom and dad, which wasn't easy at all. We went through a lot of therapy and struggled for a while, but eventually found our rhythm as just the two of us. After being on my own for a few years, I met Kira at this tennis club where our kids took lessons. She'd been divorced for a while and seemed really nice. We started hanging out more and more, and things just clicked between us. Both of us were lonely and thought we'd found someone perfect to share our lives with. Nobody tells you how hard it is to blend two families together, especially when the kids are so different. We knew there would be some problems, sure, but we had no idea it would turn into such a nightmare. When we introduced our kids to each other, Ellie was actually pretty cool about everything. She really liked having Kira around since she hadn't had a mom figure in her life for years. She was 11 at the time, and going through all that preteen stuff, so having a woman to talk to was exactly what she needed. Kira was great with her too. They would do girly stuff together like shopping and getting their nails done. But Jill was the total opposite. He was 16 and acted like a typical moody teenager who couldn't care less about his mom's new relationship. He barely spoke to any of us and spent most of his time in his room or out with friends. Kira kept saying it was because of his dad's influence and bad attitude, but promised me Jill was actually a good kid deep down and would come around eventually. So we got married, and they moved in with us. It was a huge upgrade for them. They'd been living in this tiny apartment, and now Jill got this massive room to himself in my 4-bedroom house. Ellie wasn't jumping for joy about having a new brother or anything, but she was willing to give it a shot. The problem was Jill didn't even try to be nice to her at first. They just ignored each other, which honestly wasn't that bad. I figured if they weren't talking to each other, at least they weren't fighting. Then Jill started being a real jerk to Ellie. He'd make these mean comments about her clothes or how she looked just enough to hurt her feelings, but not enough for us to really call him out on it. Ellie would try to stand up for herself sometimes, but she was just a kid, and he'd always find ways to make her feel worse. At first, Kira and I tried to play it off like normal sibling stuff, but it got to a point where we had to step in because Ellie was clearly having a rough time. That just made Jill even more of a pain. He'd act like we were picking on him whenever we told him to knock it off. I kept thinking maybe he just needed time to get used to having a new family, even though he was old enough to know better, and maybe Ellie was just disappointed because instead of getting a cool big brother who'd look out for her, she got stuck with someone who treated her like garbage. Once Ellie hit 13, she started standing up for herself more, and that's when things really went downhill. They'd fight about literally everything: who got the TV remote, whose turn it was to use the washing machine, what to have for dinner, you name it. Kira and I were constantly playing referee, and honestly, it was exhausting. We'd spend hours trying to sort out their stupid arguments that usually started over nothing. I kept thinking things would get better once Jill went to college, but nope. He picked a school like 20 minutes from our house so he could keep living at home. I tried pushing him to get a part-time job since he had all this free time in the evenings and weekends. I mean, he wasn't even doing well in his classes, but he was too lazy to work. He'd just hang around the house all day, playing video games and picking fights with Ellie. It was getting ridiculous. Things really hit rock bottom last year when Ellie had a friend over to study. Jill came downstairs and started making these horrible comments about her friend's appearance. When Ellie told him to apologize, he turned on her and started calling her fat and ugly. It turned into this massive screaming match right in our living room. Kira tried to get Jill to apologize, but he just stomped out of the house like a 5-year-old having a tantrum. The whole thing was a complete mess, and Ellie's friend never came back to our house after that. Kira felt terrible. Done. I could feel my anger boiling over. Kira and I exchanged worried glances. We both knew we had to do something. I reassured Ellie that we would handle this, and that she wouldn't have to face Jill alone anymore. It was unacceptable for her to go through this kind of harassment, especially from her own brother. I calmly suggested to Kira that we should have a serious conversation with Jill about his behavior. We couldn't let this slide any longer. He needed to understand the impact of his actions, and we had to make him confront the consequences of his behavior. After all, we had given him chance after chance, and it was time for him to realize that his actions had real implications for those around him. Kira nodded in agreement, and we decided to address Jill the next day after school. There would be no more ignoring or pretending that everything was okay. This time, he would have to listen. Done. We didn't notice he'd been standing outside Ellie's door, listening to everything. This idiot actually had the nerve to come into her room, laughing about the whole thing. Kira lost it and started yelling at him, asking what the hell was wrong with him to do something like this. But Jill just stood there laughing, saying everyone at tennis thought it was hilarious and kept talking about it, like he was proud of himself for humiliating his 15-year-old stepsister. I completely lost it. I was so close to actually hitting him. That's how angry I was. I just started screaming at him to get out of the house before I did something I'd regret. He tried to say something smart, but I just kept yelling until he left. Then, I asked Kira to give me some time alone with Ellie. Once everyone was gone, I just hugged my daughter and told her how sorry I was for bringing Jill into our lives. I felt so guilty about everything she'd been through because of him. But Ellie, being the amazing kid she is, told me it wasn't my fault. It was all on Jill and his awful behavior. Even when she was hurting this bad, she was still trying to make me feel better. I couldn't stop thinking about how guilty I felt putting Ellie through all this drama. She's seriously the best kid anyone could ask for. Most teenagers would be blaming their parents for bringing a horrible step-sibling into their lives, but not Ellie. I made sure she ate something and promised her I'd fix this mess somehow. Later that night, I talked to Kira in our room about what happened. She was really worried about Ellie too. This wasn't just regular step-siblings fighting anymore. Jill was straight up bullying her, and we both knew we had to do something serious about it before things got even worse. The next morning, Kira tried talking to Jill. She told him flat out that what he did to Ellie was cruel, and he needed to apologize. She also said he had to tell everyone at tennis that he made up those rumors and make sure nothing like this happened again. But Jill just looked at me with this attitude, like I was forcing his mom to lecture him. Then he started yelling about how he wasn't going to apologize for what he called a joke. He said if Ellie couldn't handle it, that was her problem, not his. He refused to take back anything he said. The kid literally had zero remorse about humiliating his stepsister in front of everyone she knew at tennis. I was getting more frustrated by the second. This wasn't some dumb teenager being stubborn anymore. This was just pure meanness. I've been paying for everything since I married his mom, his college tuition, expensive tennis lessons, clothes, phone, everything. I treated him like he was my own kid, and this is how he acts. He couldn't even admit he'd done something wrong. So I told him straight up, either apologize or face consequences. He just laughed it off and asked what I was going to do, ground him like he was some little kid. That's when I told him that I'd stop paying for his college tuition. That wiped the smirk right off his face. He tried pulling his usual trick, saying his mom wouldn't let me do that. Even Kira looked shocked when I said it. She definitely wasn't expecting that. But she backed me up anyway, telling him he needed to fix this mess if he didn't want to deal with what would happen. But Jill just did what he always does, stormed out and slammed the door like a bratty kid. Kira later told me she thought I was just trying to scare him straight, but I was dead serious about cutting off his tuition. Someone needed to teach this kid that actions have consequences. After Jill left, Kira asked if I was really serious about cutting off his tuition. I told her yes. If he doesn't apologize and fix this mess, I'm done paying for his college. She started freaking out, saying we can't mess up his whole future over this. I told her it's simple then. He just needs to man up and apologize. She went quiet after that because we both knew Jill's too full of himself to ever admit he's wrong. I haven't told Kira this part, but I honestly think paying for his college is just throwing money away at this point. The kid doesn't care about school at all. He only went to college so nobody would expect him to get a job. It took him 4 years just to finish high school, and he's been in his first year of college for 2 years now. Like, what am I even paying for here? I really want him to learn that he can't just treat people like garbage and get away with it. But my only real options are either cutting off his tuition or making him pay rent to live here. The problem is, I'm worried doing either of those things might seriously damage my marriage. Kira is already upset about the tuition threat. Anyone have better ideas for dealing with this situation? I'm running out of options here. Update 1. Here's an update on everything that's happened. I actually went through with my threat and stopped paying Jill's tuition. He kept being a total jerk and wouldn't even admit what he did to Ellie was wrong. The whole thing was so awful that Ellie ended up quitting tennis completely, something she's loved doing since she was little. I tried telling Kira we needed to do something about Jill's behavior before things got even worse, but she was pretty helpless about the whole thing. Jill just thought I was bluffing about the tuition and would eventually cave, but he was dead wrong about that. That when it came time to pay his semester fees, I didn't send the money. The college kept calling and emailing me about the unpaid tuition, but I ignored everything. Then, literally one day before the payment deadline, Jill comes strolling into my office like everything's cool, saying, "Dude, when are you going to pay the tuition? The accounts guys are chasing my butt, speaking to me like I'm one of his frat buddies or something." I lost it and told him straight up not to talk to me like that unless he wanted me to knock some sense into him. I made it clear I wasn't paying another cent for his education until he owned up to what he did and apologized to Ellie. But of course he still thought he could get away with everything like always. I really thought not being able to go to college anymore would knock some sense into him, but nope, he just gave me this annoyed look and said, "You think this will make me apologize?" Then walked out like it was nothing. This kid would rather drop out of college than say sorry for being cruel to his stepsister. Then he actually went and dropped out of college. Kira was really upset about the whole thing. She kept saying she should have stepped in earlier and paid his tuition herself. She thought I'd give in at the last minute, but when she realized I was serious, she offered to pay it herself. The problem was she didn't have that kind of money just sitting around. She would have had to empty out her savings account. She even went to the college, trying to get them to give her more time to pay, but Jill had already gone to his advisor and dropped out. When she tried to help him, he turned it around on her, saying she wasn't supporting him and was choosing me and Ellie over him. The funny thing is, even after all this drama and his massive ego, he's still living in my house, eating my food, and using my Wi-Fi. Kira doesn't make much money. Before we got married, she and Jill were barely getting by, living in a tiny apartment. She had to work 2 jobs just to raise him. When we got married, I told her she could quit one or both jobs if she wanted to take it easier, but she kept one job just to have her own money. Kira was completely crushed by Jill dropping out. She kept begging him to just apologize to Ellie so he could go back to school next semester, but he flat out refused. He just dug his heels in deeper and wouldn't budge an inch. After dropping out, he actually got even worse, if you can believe it. He'd sleep until noon, then spend the whole day playing video games or hanging out with his friends. He didn't look for a job and didn't try to take any responsibility for his life. The thing that really got me was that he didn't even try to figure out how to pay for college himself. He just gave up completely, like it wasn't even worth trying if someone else wasn't paying for it. This was just the start of Jill making one bad choice after another. I was getting more annoyed with him every day. Here I was, giving this kid everything, paying for his education, giving him a nice place to live, all kinds of opportunities most people would kill for, and he threw it all away because his ego was too big to say sorry to a 15-year-old girl. After watching him waste away on my couch for weeks, I had to talk to Kira about it. I told her we needed to do something to teach him a lesson, because clearly cutting off his tuition didn't work. He never cared about college anyway, so losing it wasn't really a punishment for him. The next day, Kira and I sat down with Jill and told him he needed to get a job since he wasn't in school anymore. We said he couldn't just sit around the house all day expecting us to support him forever. This kid was literally on his phone while we were talking to him and didn't even bother looking up. He just said, "I'm working on it," like we were interrupting his important social media time. I called him out right there and told him no, he wasn't working on anything. He was just sitting there waiting for me to keep throwing money at him like always. That wasn't happening anymore. Then this genius rolls his eyes and says he's going to start his own business. He just needs me to give him a loan. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. This kid had just dropped out of college that I was paying for, was living in my house for free, and now had the nerve to ask me for money to start a business. When I asked if he was serious about wanting more money after everything he'd done, he just looked me dead in the face and said, "Yeah, why not?" Like I owed him something. That was it for me. I tried being nice, tried helping him, tried everything I could think of, but he clearly had zero respect for me or anyone else in this house. So I gave him 2 options. Either start paying rent and a share of the utilities, or get out. He just screamed fine, and stormed off like always. We figured maybe this would finally light a fire under him to look for work, But nope, he just kept doing the same nothing all day long. I told him he had 1 month to find a job and start paying his share of expenses. He acted like he had all the time in the world and just ignored everything I said. A month went by and absolutely nothing changed. Him if he'd found a job yet, and he just said nope, like it was no big deal. So I told him to pack his stuff and get out. You should have seen his face. He looked at me like I'd just spoken alien language or something. He actually had the nerve to ask if I was kicking him out. I explained it wasn't about kicking him out. It was about him being an adult now and having to make adult choices. If he wasn't going to help pay for anything, he couldn't keep living here for free. That's when he completely lost it and started screaming that I wasn't his real dad, so I couldn't tell him what to do. I didn't back down though. I told him straight up that no, I wasn't his biological father, but I was the owner of the house he was living in and was the one who'd been supporting him this whole time. I was done with that. Unless he started contributing something to this household, his choice was simple: either help pay for things or leave. So Jill stormed off to his room, slamming every door on the way. A few minutes later, he came down with his bags packed and just left. Didn't even say goodbye to his own mom, just walked out like that. Kira has been completely devastated since he left. She's been crying for days, and while I'm trying my best to be there for her, I also know we did the right thing. We couldn't keep letting him get away with treating everyone like garbage. At some point, he needs to grow up and take responsibility for his actions. Then, during one of our talks about the whole situation, Kira said something that hit me hard. She told me she wishes she'd left with him. When I asked what she meant, she said, she knows what Jill did was wrong, but he is her son, and he's still young. She feels like she abandoned him. He won't answer any of her calls, and she's worried sick about where he is and if he's safe. Not going to lie, that really knocked the wind out of me. I mean, I get it. He's her kid, and she loves him no matter what, but I thought we were on the same page about making him face consequences for once in his life. I understand this is really hard for her as his mom, but having him around was making everyone else miserable. I've been wondering if I went too far though. Am I the bad guy here for finally putting my foot down about his behavior? Update. Time for another update on this whole mess. After that conversation about her wanting to leave with Jill, things got really tense between me and Kira. We barely talked for a week. Ellie tried staying out of it by keeping busy with school stuff in her room, but I could tell she was feeling all the tension too. I finally couldn't handle the silence anymore. I had to know where things stood with us, so I just asked Kira straight up if she was actually planning to leave me and go after Jill. She looked absolutely exhausted, eyes all red from crying, and told me she honestly didn't know. She said she loves me, but Jill's her only son, and she feels like she just abandoned him. I tried explaining that this wasn't about abandoning him. It was about finally making him face some consequences and learn to be responsible for once in his life. If she keeps swooping in to save him every time he messes up, he's never going to grow up or change his behavior. Kira admitted I had a point, but said that didn't make any of this easier. She explained that when it comes to your kids, sometimes you know what's right, but your heart doesn't care. You just want to protect them no matter what. Being a mom means sometimes logic goes out the window when your kid is involved, even if they're in the wrong. I understand where Kira is coming from, but I don't know what else to do here. I'm definitely not going to beg Jill to come back home. That would just teach him he can get away with anything. If he came back and actually apologized for how he's treated Ellie, maybe we could work something out. But we all know that's not happening. His ego is way too big to ever admit he did anything wrong. Update 3. It's been about 3 months now since everything went down. Kira finally heard back from Jill after trying to contact him like a million times. He's apparently crashing on some friend's couch in the next town over. Still won't admit he did anything wrong, but at least he found a part-time job, so that's something, I guess. The biggest change has been in Ellie. She's finally starting to act like herself again now that Jill's gone. She even told me yesterday she wants to start tennis again, which is huge. Things between me and Kira are still pretty rough. We're trying to work through it because I really do love her. I just hope she'll see that kicking Jill out wasn't about punishing him. It was about trying to force him to finally grow up and take responsibility for his actions. Sometimes being a parent means making the hard choices, even when it hurts.